Yo, what's up? This is Jay Dennis, and I'm back with another ranked and reviewed video. And I am very excited for this one. But first, I just want to say thank you guys to for supporting this channel. And a couple of these ranked and reviewed videos are starting to get a little bit of traction. So to anybody that's supported any of them or any video on this channel, thank you. But especially those that have watched my most recent ones that have been doing better: Megadeth, System of a Down, Seven Dust. If you haven't seen those yet, make sure you go check them out. If you like any of those bands or those albums and you want to hear my opinion on them, be sure to go check those out. I've done quite a few other bands, also a few non-metal bands too. I've done Eminem, Taylor Swift. Probably in the future I'm going to do Ariana Grande. Maybe NSYNC, I don't know. Mostly do metal on here. But at any rate, excuse me while I sip coffee. At any rate, as excited as I was to do those, and as excited as I was to revisit quite a few of metalcore and other big bands from my past, the last decade, and still listening to them today, I have another band here that this is probably the one I'm maybe like the second most excited to do. I was really excited to do Megadeth, but I am really excited to do today's band, the Black Dahlia Murder, because once again, as tragic for the most part as 2020 has been, there's been some good stuff in there, but as tragic as it's been for the most part and as difficult as it's been for the most part, one thing that's been consistent is a lot of solid, incredible bands have released great music this year. And Black Dahlia Murder is no exception, and their recent release of Verminous got me back into wanting to re-listen to their entire discography, revisit albums I've listened to in the past, listen to albums I've never listened to before, and rank and review these bad boys. So, before I get into the rank and review, I'll just let you know. So this discography is from 2003 to now, 2020. It's 9 albums. Just like a few of these other bands that I've done, they're very consistent and they're hardworking, and it sounds like they've really found a sound and they've dialed in on it and haven't really strayed away from it. And if you find a great sound and you do it well and you have great musicians, then yeah, you do what you want as a band. And if you find other ways to get creative and branch out, you might put out even better albums. I've been listening to them on again, off again, excuse me, since 2009. So when I was a senior in high school, these guys were introduced to me. I don't think Def Fluorit was out yet. I'd have to check the release date. If anything, I'm trying to remember if I heard that album at all towards like the end of graduation or something. But the album that was the most prevalent for me was, of course, Nocturnal. And then my friend also had Miasma. So I had a little bit of familiarity with those two albums back in the day. And then on again, off again, between 2009 to now, I've listened to a few of their releases. I listened to Ritual when it came out, and I should probably wait till I get to each of these albums before I give you a big history. So anyway, all that to say, I've been listening to them on again, off again since 2009. I've revisited their entire discography, of course, including their newest album, Verminous, this year. And I originally feel like I kind of rushed it, and I wanted to go back and really give every album an honest, deep listen, because there is a lot of consistent themes and a lot of consistent dynamics. I'm not going to say they put out the same album all the time. That'd be an insult. But they do put out consistent work. So I wanted to make sure I had some insights that were not repetitive, and I could at least differentiate between some of these albums. And a few of them grew on me after a few listens. And a big thing I noticed was, for the most part, these albums are like usually around 35 minutes. There's a few that are 45 minutes. But the beautiful thing about Black Dahlia Murder is they kind of just show up, put the music out, they do what they need to do, and they don't waste any time. So there's really no fluff and really no filler for the most part in any of these albums. So that's why it was really hard to rank and review these, not just because they're so consistent with their sound, but trying to find little things to be meticulous about or nitpicky about. It was hard. But anyway, so just like a few of these other rankings, the entire discography, not a single album I disliked. The spread between the not best album and the best album was an 8.19, so an 8.2 is the lowest scored album, and then the best scored album is like, I don't know, an 8.7, 8.75. So, yeah, barely 0.65, or actually no, barely 0.55 points, like between 9 albums. Kind of like Seven Dust, there were like a few ties. But I'm glad I went back and listened to a few of these, because a few albums did jump spots. A few rankings did change. And the last thing I'll say before I go on to the ranking is, actually, you know what? Fuck it. I'm going to say it as I start the ranking. So without further ado, let's get into this. Something I should have led with is Black Dahlia Murder is a melodic death metal band. They're at times with something that I call death metalcore. And they are my favorite band out of that genre. So I have a lot of respect for that entire genre. It's not something that I listen to a whole lot, but I do like the extreme heavy metal. I do like the extreme vocals, and that's why I am particularly excited to do this ranking, because out of that entire genre, Black Dahlia Murder is definitely among the elite with that, and they make that more accessible for me. So let's go through some history now. At the number 9 spot, we have their first album, Unhallowed. So before I get into it, I'm just going to say, look, like I said, I've been listening to them on again, off again since 2009, so I have no nostalgia value or no sentimental value for the early 2000s or the earliest days of Black Dahlia Murder. I understand how, putting an album out like this in 2003 that's this raw and this good, again, 8.2 out of 10, it's a great album. Every Black Dahlia Murder I can pretty much listen to from start to finish pretty easily. By the way, the bottom 2 spots are roughly tied, but I'm just giving the tiniest disadvantage to Unhallowed, because even though it's raw and it's ahead of its time, and for 2003, Trevor's vocals, to no fault of his own, his first album in, they're not there yet. His lows have always sounded incredible, but his highs are still on the immature side, but obviously they get better in later albums. It's an excellent debut for sure, and I definitely overlooked this back then. I never listened to this album until I listened to these albums for the Ranked and Reviewed, and I did listen to it a few times. It sounds like something I would have listened to back in high school, just with slightly more extreme vocals. It kind of reminded me a little bit of like As I Lay Dying or old It Dies Today, just maybe a little bit faster and with more aggressive vocals. But I understand not just why Trevor, the vocalist, but also why many people, like old school fans maybe, put this towards the top of their list. I totally understand why. I just don't have the sentimental value for this album. I think this is the only album they put out that's actually in drop C. Every other album, I believe, is in C standard. So it sounds a little bit different. Again, there is a charm to this album. Songs like, of course, Funeral Thirst is a classic, obviously. Elder Misanthropy is also a great track. My favorite song is The Blackest Incarnation. So where this album kind of suffers, and again, it's because it's their first album. Not every band puts out their best release first, in my opinion, but there are a few. It's just fast, and it just never really slows down. It just sounds a little bit repetitive. But in the middle of Blackest Incarnation, there's like an octave chord bridge with and the drumming slows down a bit. Obviously Trevor never slows down, which is fine with me. I love his vocals. And they just get a little bit more melodic in the middle, but it sounds like epic and like intense. So The Blackest Incarnation is definitely the most mature, diverse, well-written song on the album. And then so was Hymn for the Wretched. I really enjoyed that one too. Apex is a solid closer. It kind of closes on the same note that Unhallowed opens with the intro, kind of like that creepy outro, closing off that creepy intro before the breakdown hits. But anyway, so Unhallowed is my least favorite album, but I do respect it, and I can listen to it from start to finish pretty easily, but it's not the one that I would go to first. And again, I understand why people rank this one high up. It's just I'm not an old school Black Dahlia Murder fan. I happen to think that they got better over time. And I've been listening to more of their recent stuff from the last decade. That's the type of fan I am. All right. So at the number 8 spot, we have their following release, the 2005 release Miasma. So again, this was kind of the one that I was a little bit privy to back in the day, like 2008, 2009. But I didn't really listen to the entire album. I think I listened to I'm Charming back then, and then maybe Statutory Ape or Vulgar Picture. I've mentioned this in past videos, but one of my best friends, he had just this massive iTunes library. I don't know if he ripped music or he torrented it or whatever, but Miasma was one of those albums that he had on there, and then he eventually had Nocturnal and Def Lauret. Fortunately, he got me more so into Nocturnal. But with Miasma, it's got a slightly better intro than Unhallowed. Built for Sin is a little bit better. I'm Charming is a slightly better tone setter. This album actually does have one of my all-time least favorite Black Dahlia Murder songs. By the way, if we're talking about consistency, pretty much every single Black Dahlia Murder track is north of an 8 out of 10. So every song, even the quote-unquote kind of fillers tracks, are great. But Flies, I gave a 7.8, which just means it's good. So that's why ranking and reviewing these albums was a little bit challenging. Because there's just really no bad material in this discography. They're just a great band, to say the least. But anyway, Statutory Ape and Vulgar Picture are among the better tracks on the album. But then it kind of slows down for a little bit. Novelty Crosses, Dave Goes to Hollywood. Not bad songs by any means, just not my favorite tracks on the album, but better than Flies. And then Miscarriage and Spite Suicide, same sentiment. And then it closes off on the best track on the album. That's the self-titled track, Miasma. Once again, Black Dahlia Murders need to do this with every song. It's kind of good from a dynamic standpoint to do this, where on some songs, especially a closing or an opening or even a middle track, you just, instead of just doing like a blistering assault, you do something that's a little bit more progressive with some blistering assaults in there. Add some melodic in there, because you are a melodic death metal band. And it just kind of really showcases the band's ability to write mature and powerful, moving music that's not just there to make you want to destroy shit, but also like enjoy life. So I think Miasma is like kind of the perfect median between Unhallowed and Nocturnal. It's got some of the raw sound of Unhallowed, but it kind of gets closer to that more vintage Black Dahlia Murder sound that you start to hear in albums like Nocturnal. So Miasma was just a couple of tiny itty bitty hairs better than Unhallowed, in my opinion. Again, these bottom two albums, which are their first two, I understand why people like them. I understand also why I'm going to reference Trevor's ranked quite a bit on this album, on this one too. I can see why people also put Miasma towards the bottom, but I just think it's slightly better than Unhallowed. So at the number 7 spot, this is where things start to get a little bit weird for me, but this is number 7. We have their 2015 release, Abysmal. I did listen to this album when it came out back in 2015. I was living in Orlando and I had a library card, and our library just happened to have Abysmal as a CD that you could rent. So of course I checked it out and I put it on my iTunes. And I thought the fucking artwork, how could I be this far in and not talk about the artwork yet? Oh yeah, because Unhallowed and Miasma have the worst artwork. Every other album from here has insane artwork. Artwork matters. Doesn't affect the music, but it's still cool. It showcases what the band could be about. Abysmal got an 8.4 out of 10, and it took a couple of listens. It grew on me. Initial listen, I'm not talking about 2015. 2015, I listened to it, but I wasn't super duper in the Black Dahlia Murder as much as I am now. That's why I've loved doing these ranked and reviewed videos, because I've found a new love for some of these bands. I'm older and I'm more mature now, and less annoyingly critical of music, I think. This album is just a little bit inconsistent, but there are some high points that help elevate it up higher up. And of course, it does have vintage Black Dahlia Murder sound that helps it be better than its older albums. Receipt is a solid opening track, especially with a cool orchestraic opening and a brutal outro. You just like, the lyrics of the song are just intense. It kind of drops with Vlad. I think it's kind of cool what they did with the chanting, but it just, I don't know, seems like a bit of a filler of a song, but still an 8 out of 10. Yeah, it bounces back and forth between like an 8.5 song and an 8 song. So Abysmal rated well too, then Refaced, which is kind of the weakest track on the album, just seemed kind of busy. Didn't seem like it was very fluid. Best tracks on the album are Threat Level 3 and Asylum. But I also did enjoy The Fog, and I also enjoyed the closing track, That Cannot Which Die. But there are a couple of tracks that kind of weigh it down a little bit. The Advent and Refaced kind of slow the album down just a tiny bit in terms of top tier Black Dahlia Murder quality, not like actual speed of the song. And it's kind of weird to put one of their newer albums this low on the list, but Abysmal, you can only spin so many yarns in a row before you put out an album that's going to probably hit a wall a little bit. But it's still a great album. It's just probably one that I would take out of their 10 songs. I'd probably take like 6 or 7 of them and put them on a playlist, and then the rest of them I would probably not listen to that much. At the number 6 spot, we have Deflorate, and sorry if I pronounce it wrong, Deflorate to Florate. Trevor said he wished he'd put a pronunciation thing on the album artwork, which is basically a death metal version of Power Slave from Iron Maiden. I think the artwork is cool. Again, I was a little bit privy to this album back when it actually came out. I was familiar with songs like Black Valor and I Will Return, but everything else, I just wasn't into them as much back then. But this is a relentlessly heavy album. It's very straightforward up until the last track, I Will Return, which is a classic. It's the best song on the album. But the album is a bit repetitive. But they have kind of their all-star lineup on this album. At least what most fans deem their all-star lineup. What really makes a Black Dahlia Murder album is who's on the drums and who's on the lead guitar, in my opinion. Bass doesn't hurt either, because you're always going to have Trevor, and you're always going to have... Sorry, I forget the rhythm guitarist names, but Trevor and the rhythm guitar player have been there since the beginning, and they've had a couple of lineup changes. And I think it really depends on who is on the lead guitar and the drum spot. And then for some albums, the bass really makes a difference too. But for Deflorate, compared to Nocturnal, the lead guitar work on this album is insanely better. The solos in Throne of Lunacy, I Will Return, I think a selection of Natural, there's just so much better lead guitar work going on, and Shannon Lucas is just a fucking monster on the drums. If they could get Shannon Lucas back on drums, I mean, I don't want to fuck with their current lineup. It's super good, to say the least. But I think Shannon Lucas was their best drummer, and that really shined in Deflorate. Basically, I know they say that the guitars are a little quiet in the mix. It doesn't really bother me. But it's just a very consistent album. It takes a few listens for it to really grow on you. His low vocals sound incredible on this album. And it closes on a high note with I Will Return, which is, once again, just like Miasma. Like, you take kind of like a brutal but melodic song, and you make that the closing track. It's the best song on the album. And it's relentless, it's heavy. Deflorate is an easy album to listen to from start to finish. It's just this low on the list because... aside from I Will Return, every song was between an 8.2 and an 8.5. Like, there weren't any high 8 songs or excellent tracks to help elevate this album higher up. But I Will Return is awesome, and so is a selection of Natural. Excuse me. And, of course, Throne of Lunacy is badass, too. Next up, we have, at the number 5 spot, we have Ritual, at their 2011 release. This is their longest album. along with Everblack. This is their longest album. This is an album that I was privy to when it came out in 2011. 2011 was kind of a difficult year for me towards the end, especially when this album came out. So I don't have all the best memories to this album, but I do have the ability to kind of go back and re-listen to music and kind of reprogram the sentiments and the feelings that I'm feeling when I listen to it. So any negative feelings aren't going to influence the way I feel about this album in a negative way, but usually positive feelings help boost an album for sentimental value. Ritual is by every stretch their most, I guess you could say, their most experimental album. But what does experimental mean for Black Dahlia Murder? It means they throw in samples. It means they throw in strings. They throw in piano. It's still relentlessly heavy. It's still extremely fast. It's still brutal. Trevor's still screaming. I don't think I've heard a single clean vocal out of him, which is totally fine. He's a fucking monster on vocals. I think there's like one spoken word or deep talking voice that he does like an Everblack or something. Is it Everblack? It's something. But for the most part, Trevor's like 99.5% screaming. Shrine to Madness is an awesome opening track, but one of the best Black Dahlia Murder tracks is on this album, Moonlight Equilibrium. That is a brilliant single, super catchy chorus. I love that song. It's kind of funny talking about singles. Oh shit, I've been recording this thing forever. It's kind of funny talking about singles with like melodic death metal, because you're like, oh my god, are you talking about the ones that kind of sold out? It's like, no, man. Singles with this, it's just, I don't know, it's different than talking about like a pop singer or a rock album or something. It's just, I don't know, man. But on Stirring Seas of Blood, that bass line in the chorus, Conspiring with the Damned, that melodic bridge, like they just kind of really hit the dynamics with this album really well. It was an excellent follow-up to Defloret. It was definitely a couple hairs better. Like I said, it's still a fast album, but it's got more slow melodic parts that really make the album more dynamic. I fucking love the guitar solo and like the post solo part. The entire song, The Window, is the second best track off the album. I fucking love the key that it's in. I just love that entire song. The Window is awesome. And the melodic section and the guitar solos of Carbonized and Cruciton, however you say that word, another great track. The only parts that it kind of dips a little bit are Den of the Picarist, but the bass is really good in that song. Malenchantments of the Neurosphere, even though the bridge and the solo in that song are great, it's just not the best song on the album. And then The Great Brain Nullifier, kind of still a great track, but just not the best on the album. And then the only thing that this album suffers from is it doesn't have one of the strongest closing tracks. Blood in the Ink is a great track, but it's just not as powerful as like I Will Return or Miasma or something. So Ritual's got a little bit of sentimental value for me, and it's definitely great on additional listens. But it's kind of just sitting right there in the middle. And I know a lot of people put this album higher up, but I just think there's more to be appreciated from Black Dahlia Murder. Alright, this video is coming out longer than I anticipated, but let's go ahead and knock out these top four. So at the number 4 spot, we have the follow-up release, Everblack, 2013. Also their longest album at 45 minutes, just like Ritual. This album is very much front-loaded. First 5 tracks are basically the best songs on the album, except Map of Scars is also a intense closing track. So the bookend effect, meaning the first and last track, the sandwich, makes this album just insane. And I see a lot of people rank this album lower, but Everblack kind of has possibly the best artwork. As much as I love Abysmal, I love the artwork for Everblack. I'm a fan of the Alien series, and that's what it reminds me of. There's more catchy choruses on this album, if you can believe that, like melodic guitar solo accompanied by really dynamic vocals in songs like Raped and Hatred by Thorns and Phantom Limb Masturbation. I mean, just the fucking song titles remind me very much of like Death Clock. Not just the guitar tuning, C standard, but just the fucking guitar work. It's a very well-rounded album overall. There's a perfect blend of like some of the most brutally heavy vocals and music you're going to hear from Black Dahlia Murder, but the melodic parts are also injected in there beautifully. How you follow up that many great albums in a row, Excuse me, fucking allergies today. It's just a very solid album, Everblack, from front to back. I wouldn't even call them dips, but just tracks 6 and 7, Control and Bloodmine. Those are kind of the weakest tracks on the album, but they're not filler. But they're a little bit of a dip from the first couple of tracks. And Hell's and Where She Waits for Me is one of the best opening tracks of a Black Dahlia Murder album. My favorite track on the album is Goat of Departure. Just the speed, the key, the guitar solo, the riffs on that one. I fucking love the low-end catchy riffs of the first 2 tracks. But then, of course, fucking Into the Everblack, track 3. Just the chuggy nature of the riffs with Trevor's low vocals. You can't fuck with that song. It's so good live, too. So, overall, Everblack is a very underrated album, in my opinion. And as we get to these top 4, it starts to become difficult to rank them, but they're just slightly marginally better than each other. Like, there's no blowouts here. Black Dahlia Murder is just a fucking excellent band. Number 3 spot, we have the one that started it all for me for the most part, their 2007 release, Nocturnal. This is kind of like the cult favorite, the fan favorite. It opens up with one of their catchiest, most heavy tracks, Everything Went Black. But then it's followed up by one of their most iconic tracks overall, What a Horrible Night to Have a Curse. This is where we start to get into, well, Moonlight Equilibrium got a 9. But these albums are going to be starting to be where we start to have like 9 and above songs. What a Horrible Night to Have a Curse is an excellent song. It's a 9 out of 10. Just the chuggy riffs that are catchy, and there's swing to them, and there's great tremolo picking. Even the only thing that Nocturnal suffers from, really, that's it, is this guitar player is probably better than me. I forget their names, but the lead guitar player on Nocturnal doesn't play top tier Black Dahlia Murder solos that you start to hear in like their newer work. They're kind of simple, and on some songs they sound great, like Climatic Degradation and To a Breathless Oblivion. I love the guitar solos in those songs. What a Horrible Night to Have a Curse is partially known for its guitar solo, but it's just something that like a intermediate player would probably write for a song. So that's the only thing that I ding that song on. But other than that, What a Horrible Night to Have a Curse has a lot of nostalgia value for me. Like, this album actually has memories associated with it from high school. Not the entire album, but first 2 tracks and the last 2 tracks. Everything in the middle didn't start to grow on me or become prevalent for me until later. Which is kind of why this album's sitting at number 3. It's the nostalgia tracks that really elevate this album up. And Black Dahlia Murder's absolute best track is on this album. This has never changed for me since high school. Even with listening to new albums, the song To a Breathless Oblivion is their best song in my opinion. It's a perfect 10 out of 10. It is a fucking dime of a song. You cannot fuck with the heavy storytelling, the drumming, the tremolo picking, the storytelling of the lyrics, the progression of the song. Absolute best song they've ever written in my opinion. And even though he says his vocals are really screechy on this album, I find them charming. And it definitely makes it to where the intensity of his low vocals create a more powerful contrast when his vocals are a little bit more screechy on this album. So yeah, this album has nostalgia value and it has their best songs. So that's why it's sitting comfortably at the number 3 spot. But everything in the middle, from Virally Yours up until Climatic Degradation, they're great tracks, but they're not their top tier work. Alright, so now we get to the top 2. Very, very, very close, almost a tie between these 2. But I forget if his name is like Brandon Ellis. I forgot if he's the newest lead guitarist or if he was their last one. But whoever their current lead guitarist is, he's the best one that Black Dahlia Murder's ever had, in my opinion. And I'm also a huge fan of Max on bass. He's made the last couple of albums sound insane. And of course, Trevor is just at his peak now. But the last 2 albums are Verminous and Nightbringers. They're most 2 recent albums. But the number 2 spot, I'm going to give, just by the slightest disadvantage, I'm going to give the number 2 spot to Verminous, their 2020 release. That badass, beautiful green album artwork. After all these years, after all these colors, what are they going to do next? A pink album? They've been through most of the colors now. Verminous is just such a mature, amazing album, and it has one of the best songs to come out all year, Child of Night. That single is my second favorite Black Dahlia Murder song. I gave it a 9.8 out of 10. I fucking love that song. I love the time changes. I love the evil, slow vocals, and just the incubi or E-I-E-I. Like, it's such a song. The music video is awesome. But let's talk about the rest of the album. It opens up with Verminous, which is a solid opening track, but then it speeds up with Godlessly. It's just such an intense song, and that low-end bass and low-end growl in between the verses just really makes the album more dynamic. But then it's followed up with 2 insanely good singles, Removal of the Oaken Stake and, of course, Children of Night, which both feature insane guitar work. The rhythm section of Oaken Stake and the storytelling of the lyrics are just top tier. And then we move over to Sunless Empire, which has one of the best guitar solos that Black Dahlia Murder has ever put out. That entire song's amazing. Check out the live performance of Yule Them All. It's so damn good. Leather's Apron is also fantastic. How Very Dead is a solid track. And then Wereworm's Feast is another beautiful progressive song with amazing lead guitar work in the chorus. The solo is fantastic. It's one of their best songs ever. And then it's followed up with a decent instrumental and then a decent closing track. Verminous and Dawn of Rats. It's not the most powerful bookend effect, but it's enough to elevate this album to the number 2 spot. So Verminous is very mature. There's a certain darkness and an evil theme behind it. The guitar solos are more arpeggio and fluid, and I love that. There's more time changes, there's more slow riffs, and even a little bit of slow drumming that just kind of make it interesting, make the album very interesting. The bass tone is top notch, and there's just a lot of hooks on this album. Like, it's just by the slightest hair. The only reason why Verminous is not the number 1 album, this is the album that jumped up a few spots, by the way. I just had a feeling that this album would grow on me further. The way it made me feel, especially Children of Night, that song is just one of their absolute best. It's just because there's just a couple little dips, and it doesn't open and close as on high of a note as their number 1 album, Nightbringers. So the odd thing about Nightbringers is it doesn't have any God tier songs, but it's just a extremely consistent and brutal album. This is the easiest one to listen to from start to finish. It's dynamically heavy. It's catchy in the right places. The guitar solos on this album are the best ones. This album is basically like a much better version of Def Leppard in terms of like having just relentless heavy energy, but they've matured so much with so many albums in between Def Leppard and Nightbringers. Nightbringers is their best album. It's tragic that it's only 33 minutes, but like I said, they don't waste any time, so the 33 minutes does feel fulfilling. But Widowmaker is kind of the best opening track that they have. It is. It's their highest rated opening track. And then The Lonely Deceased is it's up there, tied with Miasma, Def Leppard, and Everblack's closing tracks as a solid closing track. But the way Widowmaker is followed up with Of God and Serpent, that's the best song on the album in my opinion. But the album is overall an 8.7 out of 10, which might make you wonder, like, why isn't this like a 9? Why isn't it excellent? I don't know, but I don't know why I wouldn't say a Black Dahlia Murder isn't a 9 out of 10 or isn't excellent, but it's a really great album, and maybe it's just preference of genres or whatever, but it's just Nightbringers is their heaviest album. That's why I love it the most. But it's so well written, it's so catchy. The low end riffs, the solos, his vocals, the bass tone, the drumming, like everything about this album is top tier Black Dahlia Murder, but only by a margin because Verminous did such a great job being the more experimental, more mature, more, I guess, risk-taking version of maybe Nightbringers or something. But I feel like Verminous is just a very evil, more well-produced version of maybe Ritual or something. But with Nightbringers, the song Matriarch, and of course the title track Nightbringers, very, very catchy. That chorus, Kings of the Night World, just the shredding in that song. I believe it's that song, not Catacomb, Hetacomb. But yeah, again, just what really elevates certain albums is just the dynamics. It's not just a relentless barrage of heavy brutality, but how do the dynamics of certain time changes or riffs or the way they complement drums or bass tones or even vocals, how does that work? And Nightbringers is virtually flawless with that. So to recap, the final ranking is Unhallowed, Miasma, Abysmal, Defloret, Ritual, Everblack, Nocturnal, Verminous, and Nightbringers. And as you'll notice, aside from Abysmal and Nocturnal, it seems like progressively Black Dahlia has just gotten better and better over the years. There was a dip with Abysmal, and Nocturnal was a spike. It was a peak. But generally, if you look at the overall theme of their 9 albums, they've gotten progressively better with every release. And I love that about them. I'm going to do something different here, but I'm also going to mention my top 10 songs from Black Dahlia. Bottom 5 in no particular order are Goat of Departure from Everblack, Removal of the Oaken Stake from Verminous, Widowmaker from Nightbringers, The Window from Ritual, and Wereworm's Feast also from Verminous. And the top 5 are, and I believe these are in particular order, Of God and Serpent from Nightbringers, Moonlight Equilibrium from Ritual, What a Horrible Night to Have a Curse from Nocturnal, Child of Night from Verminous, and To a Breathless Oblivion is my all-time favorite Black Dahlia Murder song from Nocturnal and overall. So you can tell that 3 of their top 10 tracks are off of Verminous, which just means that Verminous is just this far in their career, they're putting out freaking beautiful, heavy work, and I love that. Thank you guys for watching or listening. This was an audio slideshow, so feel free to comment what you agree or disagree with my ranking. This was a very objective ranking. Not a whole lot of feel or sentimental value here except for Nocturnal and maybe even Verminous this year. Nightbringers, too. What are your favorite albums? What are your least favorite albums? What songs did you like? What did you agree with? What didn't you agree with me? I don't know, man. Which lineup is your favorite? I think their current lineup is the best right now. They put up their last 2 albums are their best albums. And I think the only way that they could possibly improve is if they brought Shannon Lucas back, but I'm not going to shit on their new drummer. He's awesome too. So make sure you subscribe to the channel. Make sure you check out the Ranked and Reviewed series. This video came out a little longer than I expected, but I essentially reviewed 9 albums, and Black Dahlia Murder is awesome, and they've really become one of my favorite bands this year, so obviously I have a lot to say. So I'll catch you guys on the next one.